Well, welcome to the US UK Apple data protection panel. So let's give a brief background of what we're talking about. That the, According to a story in the Washington Post, they had heard that Apple had received a order from the United Kingdom to technical capabilities order. It was under the Investigatory Powers Act, which critics call the Snoopers Charter, UK law that allows them to give technical assistance orders, technical capabilities orders to tech companies to make their systems easier for law enforcement to access. And these are secret orders, so you're not supposed to know whether anyone has been given. But nevertheless, this seemed to leak out through the Washington Post. And it led to Apple removing advanced data protection for its UK users. Advanced data protection puts encryption on iCloud backups. And why this is sort of important is that a lot of things, especially on modern phones generally, and in particular on Apple phones, are encrypted. That you can encrypt your phone and have to use your biometrics or passcode to unlock. Encrypt iMessage communications, FaceTime, and so on. But for a very long time, Apple would back up phones to iCloud if you turn it on, backups, and those backups would be in the clear. And this was an interesting detente that allowed law enforcement to generally get access to suspects' information by getting it from their backups, and aiming in a time where there are many government pressures to reduce encryption, but they were satisfied if they could get the material by getting it from the backup. And then, with some pressures from those who were in favor of strong encryption and Apple agreement with that, they added advanced data protection to allow for encrypted backups, thus making it so that investigators could not get to that information. And this, of course, upset a number of people in law enforcement in the U.S. It continues to be working. It works in a number of other places. But in the UK, they had this law, the law that would require mandated backdoors, and apparently used it there. And so Apple decided, rather than break the encryption, rather than put a backdoor into the encryption, telling their users that the information would remain encrypted, that they would remove advanced data protection and tell everybody in the UK, I'm sorry, you can't have encrypted backups. We are sad that we are forced to do this, without specifically mentioning that they got this order, because that's still kind of been, and it is highly likely that they took advantage of another feature of this bill, which allows someone who receives that order to appeal internally, secretly. The appeal is more about whether the order is sort of worth it, that the efforts and the downsides of it and the capabilities of adding it will be worth the investigatory upsides of adding it. It is not a way to challenge it, but nevertheless, one might have challenged it because the European Court of Human Rights had issued a ruling in 2004 saying that encryption was a key aspect of protecting privacy. It was dealing with a case involving Telegram and some encryption there, but nevertheless, that was a statement that under the human rights law of the European Union, encryption was protected. And so Apple cited to that in some parliamentary testimony. We know that was on their mind, and most likely they were raising those issues in as well. And then the newest news is that recently the U.S. announced that they had reached a deal with the U.K. to allow for advanced data protection. We did not have a backdoor, as they for U.S. Users who might be caught up by in the UK backdoor. It came up from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, without very many details. That happened on the 19th of this month. So that's sort of an introduction. We can get into more detail.
All right. Well, I am Isaac Sheff. I'm a computer scientist. My research is in mostly distributed systems and security. And while I'm not a cryptographer, I do work with some of them. There are a lot of things you can do with encrypted backup. In this case, we're mostly focusing on the simple case where you keep encrypted files on someone else's computer. So you keep your, let's see, I think the list from Apple was iCloud backup, iCloud Drive, photos, notes, reminders, Safari bookmarks, Siri shortcuts, voice memos, wallet passes, and Freeform. I have no idea what Freeform is, but you keep those things encrypted on Apple servers, and then even if Apple is subpoenaed or gets a warrant or whatever, they can't necessarily turn them over. I point out that Tulsi Gabbard's notice says that it's an agreement with the UK not to enforce whatever requirements they are on American nationals, which means if you're an American with advanced data protection in the UK, you won't get arrested for that. But this does not, it's not clear exactly what the agreement was. We just have her, I think, tweet on this. So if you're a Canadian in the UK and you've turned on advanced data protection, maybe you need to watch out. Obviously, if you're a British person in the UK, then it's just not available to you, at least not directly.
Hi everyone, Rich Gatz. I am a lawyer and also a vice president of cyber claims at Arch Insurance. I focus on data privacy, cybersecurity, and multimedia type matters. I think this is a really interesting topic because it really is only discussing cloud encryption. Okay, I don't know if you guys have heard of some of what's going on when people are coming in or out of the country. Border Patrol is literally seizing people's phones, and they can actually request that you unlock a phone. Okay, that's perfectly legal. So the thing is about this ADP is that it only encrypts your cloud backups, but keeps the keys to your backups on your actual device. Okay, so it's an interesting from a legal perspective, that if you were to get a subpoena or whatnot for your device or backups, there is potentially a way to get access to them through the actual mobile device. But this is requesting specifically a backdoor into the cloud-based services, right? And as Isaac said, the way ADP works is the keys are on the mobile device itself. So it's perfectly encrypted on the cloud. So if Apple wanted to give them the data, it would be an encrypted file and they wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So it's going to be, again, interesting to see what actually happens. From my understanding, the UK is not specifically like back down on this. They're still trying to move forward as far as getting some type of access. But this administration has arguably stood up for American consumers in regards to this. But again, there hasn't been anything official.
Hey, I'm Bill Budington. I'm a senior staff technologist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And other than the obvious concerns that this raises for consumers and their backups, it's kind of interesting how this is mandated code, basically. It's a mandated speech issue as well, where a foreign company can essentially demand that some backdoor be given or some backdoor be built into a backup system of an American company. And to what extent other nations can do that, is a matter of international law, or just kind of collaboration of multilateral or bilateral agreement. But it is essentially compelled speech, and that raises First Amendment issues as well. When we talk about not, a company not being compelled to write code that supports some, some kind of backdoor or some kind of like access into the contents of a user's photos or notes or whatever, that they're actually making them write some code for them in order to have access to that. So interesting First Amendment implications as well.
All right. Well, and then I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. So I'm Kurt Opsahl. I am the Associate General Counsel for Cybersecurity and Civil Liberties Policy with the Filecoin Foundation. For many years prior to that, I was the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where I was the General Counsel. And I have been working on these issues of backdoors and encryption for many years. A veteran of the crypto war, as they say. And just to go on a little bit more on what you were saying about the code is speech issues. So this originated, that doctrine that code is considered speech protected by the First Amendment came through the form of encryption. It was because of a publication online of strong encryption in an era when there were export controls of encryption. Encryption was considered a munition for many years and was regulated as such. Pushing open source code that provides strong encryption was found to be protected speech. And these are some of the issues that would come up if somebody tried to enforce a requirement for someone to write code in a particular manner on Apple, for example, in the United States. And this actually was an issue that nearly came to a head many years ago when there was a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, and they got the perpetrator's phone. And I was telling you before about the iCloud backup loophole by it not having encrypted. Well, for reasons, they turned off the phone, and then it wouldn't start backing up once it was restarted. If they had just left it alone for probably a day, maybe less, it would have automatically backed up, and then they could have gotten the stuff from the iCloud. But they didn't do that, so that they needed to find a way to break it. And in that case, what they wanted Apple to do was to basically issue a update, which would necessarily go to all phones that would have this backdoor. So very much putting for the grand backdoor in order to get into one phone, they would have to compromise the security of all phones. And this was coming forward with there was briefings and a hearing scheduled on this issue, including the code as speech First Amendment arguments. And the day that the hearing was scheduled, I believe, was the day of, maybe the night before. They said, "Never mind. We've cracked we hacked our way in, and we don't need to get this legal order." And so that case, therefore, was moot. So we didn't get to have the legal answer there. It was so disappointing. I was on my way to that hearing when I heard it was canceled. And I think it would have won, but we would find out. But perhaps, at least with when they're seizing phones at the border, I have heard reports of where they take a locked phone somewhere and do something with it, and it might be that they're taking advantage of Celebrate ability to extract data off the phone for some security flaws. That is a cat and mouse battle between Apple and those who do it. I think if you have an older phone or haven't updated your software, the odds increase that there is an uncorrected flaw there. So keep your stuff on.
That's right. Just to add to that briefly, Celebrate's UFED, it's a universal forensic extraction device, is their flagship product. Gray Shift, which was bought by Magnet Forensics. Gray Shift is based in Atlanta, but the parent company that bought them is based in Canada. And Gray Shift's Gray Key device is an extraction device there. It's kind of second in the market. And then there's several other players in the field of forensic extraction. These are just devices that they can plug in at the local PD and extract the contents of your device, given that they have some exploit, some vulnerability that they can use to get into, unlock the device first, and then do either forensic extraction, or either a physical extraction, which is a bit by bit copy or a logical extraction, which is copying the files or app data. So, yeah.
Speaking of grand backdoors and security flaws, I point out that one of the reasons that Apple offers advanced data protection is not just in case of government warrants, it's in case of mistakes by Apple, in case actors outside of Apple who aren't supposed to get a hold of the files inside of Apple, they'll be encrypted and then they'll still be safe. This does mean that if you are in the UK and actors outside of Apple get a hold of the files inside of Apple, even if they don't have a warrant, they will now be able to read your files too. So in forcing companies to include these backdoors weakens their security, not only to the government that it's intended to weaken the security to, but also just to any hackers. For more on unintended use of government mandated backdoors, see the Kalia panel. That's later today.
I also think it's interesting just to look at differences in the legal framework between the UK and US.
Very
Right?
First Amendment.
Right. And also, generally, if you're going to violate a constitutional right, you need something called strict scrutiny. Okay, which means that there must be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but a legitimate interest in that type of activity. And that is a very high bar. Whereas in the UK, they specifically have a law that technically allows them to do this, right? So I think, it's going to be interesting, again, to see if the UK will follow through with this or not. I think, given the fact they're no longer part of the EU, that they're not as privacy focused as they used to be. The UK GDPR is almost line by line a copy of the EU GDPR, but they're able to kind of do things a little bit more ad hoc now that they don't have to stay in line with the rest of the EU. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here.
Yeah, rip on that a bit. Yeah, it's right that strict scrutiny is a high bar to meet. In addition, to showing that there's a legitimate government interest, it has to be the least restrictive means to achieve that end. And that makes it very problematic when you have it where the end is to get into a small number of people's files, and that the means is to reduce the security and of all of the people, billions of users, files, might be harder for them to meet that test. And
But who knows what the Supreme Court will actually do, though? So, because they don't really.
Well, we used to
actually
have this thing
listen
called
to
during
it.
season.
Yeah,
That's
we
not
used
as
to.
prominent anymore.
Yeah, if you guys don't know what stare decisis is, it basically means that we will look at the prior decisions of our court and give them precedence. Our current court seems to not follow that doctrine, as they've overturned a lot of, multi-decade-old law. So even though we're talking about a constitutional law analysis in regards to whether or not an entity can be forced to give up encrypted keys for your data, who knows what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. Anything's up for grabs.
I'm hopeful, at least on this issue, that they would stay strong. And of course, we will see. But one of the things that has been useful and the evolving backdoor debates are that some of the things that were predicted have come true. And again, plugging in for the Kalia panel to go for a particular example where China got access to a lot of Americans' information. But a lot of the folks in government who care about security to protect themselves and to some extent the citizenship from other people around the world who are trying to spy on their things, realize that having everybody by default encrypted strongly is a good thing, and suggested people use encrypted messaging phones and such. There still remains, some who feel like they can have it both ways, where they can have it so there is strong encryption against the adversaries and a backdoor for the good people. I think that is not feasible, but go into more of that if you want. But there at least is a more of a recognition that encryption is not just something used by criminals and bad people, that it is something that is very useful to have for everybody and useful to protect against foreign adversaries.
I wanted to touch on some of the technical aspects of this, and that's, for instance, like when demanding a backdoor that is delivered to everyone because of the delivery mechanisms that have been built into Android or iOS devices. They're not a feasible way to create a backdoor just for one device. That kind of they've kind of built guarantees that that can't happen. And so when we talk about, so for instance, the move to these forensic extraction devices, for instance, rather than mandated backdoors, the kind of real world implications of that are that you have some number of unknown and unreported to the company what's called zero-day exploits in the parlance of security security engineers and architects. It's basically named so that they have exactly 0 days to fix it when it's reported. But the implication there is that if you use a 0-day exploit to get into a phone, then there is a chance every time you use it of discovery. And that kind of cat and mouse game that Kurt was mentioning earlier is happening so that the company learns about it because it's been used or reported, but usually when it's exploits that are held closely by the solid rights and gray keys of the world, they will not want to have that reported, obviously, and they won't report it themselves. So they'll hold their cards close to their chest, and once they use that exploit, Apple will do some network analysis or some disk analysis and determine how it was that a company was able to get into a phone, and then they will go and fix that vulnerability. And this, the process repeats. So there is a burgeoning exploits market, and that you can see on certain sites that until December, a company called Zerodium, which offered bounties for reporting zero-day exploits to them, had a market of what's called zero click, which means you don't have to click on a link, for instance. There's no interaction involved. Zero click full chain, which means you have full access to the operating system. Full chain access to an iOS device would be in the ballpark of $2.5 million to report that vulnerability to Zerodium. So yeah, this is all kind of part of this exploits market, and they don't want to use these, and that kind of also creates a de facto limit to mass surveillance, right? If they can't use it on everyone, because if they did, then it would be quickly found and discovered. So they'll, as I said, hold those cards close to their chest and only play them when they have a high profile or high risk target. So I think that it is preferable to a situation where they build a backdoor that makes us all vulnerable.
So I think I have to play devil's advocate here for a minute. We've been positioning this as a dichotomy between a world where the company has a backdoor into all the phones that they make and a world where the company has no access to any user's data. And there are attempts at research into systems that would allow for some kind of reasonable middle ground that isn't just digging a backdoor in every device. The problem with the trying to keep every user's data absolute is, as you said, it creates this law enforcement funded market for zero-day exploits, which can be used by people who aren't law enforcement. and don't get reported to the people who can actually fix these bugs because law enforcement is going to pay money for them. So an example of a compromised paper was Stefan Savage's 2018 lawful device access without mass surveillance risk. As you said, the phones are manufactured these days specifically not with this capability, and he proposes a way you could add a small amount of hardware to phones specifically for the purpose of law enforcement access and a series of steps to ensure that it can't reasonably be used by anybody but parties who would be authorized by the manufacturer, which presumably would be law enforcement. Now, this is the FF. We don't generally trust law enforcement all that much. And that does mean that personally I tend to find myself on the absolutist side. But I just felt that I had to point out that there are people who believe in the middle ground.
Well, I guess that's an important question. should Apple have taken away ADP in the UK? Because I'm a privacy by design person. I think that everyone has an inherent and constitutional right to privacy, not to mention the protections under the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. So if a law enforcement they're already spying on us, right? We already have fake cell phone towers that are reading our information without our explicit consent. But should Apple have basically said, okay, you know what, we're just not going to offer this to our UK customers, or should they have bought it for our?
Personally, the way Apple's ADP is currently implemented, it can't coexist in the UK law. So either they have to try and fight to change the law as they understand it, or they have to just discontinue the product. And in practice, as a corporation, if you don't want corporations in charge of your laws, this means that they have to discontinue the product, as I understand it. Now, they, in principle, could try and increase the security of UK customers with some kind of compromised product. This would involve Savage's proposal, for example, puts hardware on phones because it's not about cloud backup, it's about phone backup, that requires a certain amount of essentially a proof of work that has to be exercised using the phone. So if law enforcement gets the phone, they have to hold on to it for a certain period of time and use a law enforcement private key that's recognized by the public key and put it on the device. And after a certain amount of time, that can decrypt the device.
So I guess, though, in that paper, does it mention, how law enforcement gets access to that? Because arguably, so law enforcement can, if you have a biometric lock on your phone, they can make you unlock it.
Right. So
in order to leverage the Fourth Amendment, you need some type of text-based or number-based lock or PIN code.
Mm-hmm.
For that, they need an actual subpoena and/or warrant.
So for them, it was assuming that this was basically a model in the case that Kurt brought up earlier. It's assuming that law enforcement gets a hold of a phone and doesn't have the user and wants to decrypt it. So what they would need to do is serve a warrant to the manufacturer, who would provide them with part of the key they need. They would need to physically use the hardware on the phone for a certain period of time to do essentially a proof of work thing in the phone. And they would need a private key corresponding to a public key hardwired into the phone that presumably was assigned to law enforcement when they set it up. So between the company being in charge of checking the warrant on the grounds that if the company really wanted to snooch the facts out of your phone, they probably could, and the hardwired keys and the period of time in which lawyers could presumably hope to intervene, it provides a avenue for law enforcement to extract secrets from the phone without paying fortunes for the discovery of 0 days. Now, again, this panel is technically about cloud backup, so you would need a different thing.
So in 2023, the UK government also was very upset with WhatsApp. They were demanding.
They also do encrypted backups.
Yeah, that they were demanding access to scan encrypted messages for child sex abuse. And ultimately, the UK said, well, we don't have the technology to do this at the moment, so we're just going to kind of let you be here. You're right. So I guess the question for the panel is, what's the difference between this fight between Apple in the UK and WhatsApp in the UK, in that WhatsApp is still fully functioning in the UK. Everyone's using it. I was just there a couple months ago and had to get a WhatsApp number. I'm like, you guys don't have regular cell phone numbers? Like, what is this? But like, I mean, what's the difference between that from like an important perspective of Apple back, or I'm sorry, the UK backing down with WhatsApp, but then kind of taking a stronger stance the with Apple?
So some different things going on here. So one is that what with the advanced data protection thing, well, one is till perhaps recently with respect to American users, the UK didn't back down, and they sent a technical capabilities order and said that we shall do this. Or I guess the alternative was, I mean, turning off advanced data protection accomplished what the UK was asking. Right? They got direct access to the cloud. It just did it in a manner that the main difference between that and what the UK was really hoping was that people knew about. They, Apple's thing was like, we don't want to lie to our consumers and say that we have end-to-end encrypted and no one else has the key when in fact someone else has the key. And I respect that position. In the WhatsApp case, I mean, we don't details of what the technical capabilities order proposed was, but it sounds a lot like that they were able to show the UK that the technical capabilities weren't handled. Succeeded in saying that this would cause too much harm for what it was offering. But one of the things I also wanted to we are talking about this panel focuses on cloud backups of things, and that means that everybody's things are sent to a centralized location with Apple where all the iClouds are, iCloud backup data is, versus a phone. Now, if you have a phone and you have possession of the phone as say law enforcement, or if you are a bad guy who just stole or mugged someone for the phone or whatever, you're in a very different spot. You're looking at one person, or one person per phone, and you have to do some effort to get to the point where you have control over them. If everybody's data is on a cloud system and it is unencrypted in that system, then there is a sort of one-stop shop. It can set up at least the circumstances in which there would be mass surveillance, where it's not just, we think this is a bad guy and we want to, like San Bernardino, literally, shot up a bunch of people and was killed by police, and we want to find out why. I guess finding out who did it was taken care of already, and they needed to get into that particular person's phone, versus a system where you would say, why don't we scan all of the backups for everybody in the UK to see if they have any files that are. CSAM would be one of the first things. CSAM is often the entree point for a lot of the encrypted backdoors, and trying to reduce encryption on the net so they can find child sexual abuse materials. Everybody hates those, and fair enough. But then, once that capability is in place, it can be used for other things. And this requires a lot of trust in one's government, that they would only use it to look for things that you think it's appropriate for governments to look for. And, one of the other differences, we mentioned it several times here with things in the U.S., we have the Fourth Amendment protections and requires for warrants, and, the First Amendment speech protections. They don't have that in the UK. It's enough that some people made a revolution over some of these issues and formed the U.S. And while they have some traditions of civil liberties that have been around in the UK and for a very long time, these are not prohibitions. These are like guidelines. They can go without, and so the UK as a government is able to do a lot of things that would be subject to constitutional challenges. Now, in this particular case, we believe it's likely that Apple is challenging it on the grounds of the Convention on Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, where the UK is a signatory to that, and thus should be bound by the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. So that functions sort of like a constitution, where they have a treaty that they signed with everyone else in Europe about what level of human rights they would have, but they don't have the same sort of constitutional system where you have the more robust protections in the United States. One other interesting thing to note when you're thinking about this, so the US and the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are collectively have a group called the Five Eyes. And the Five Eyes are the intelligence services of those 5 countries who cooperate and information share among themselves. And there's been some, credible evidence that part of that cooperation is, spying on people at the request of one of their partners, setting up a situation where if it is okay for, say, the UK to get into some information about an American who happens to be in the UK at the time, and then they can share it with the US, and then the US wouldn't have to worry about this pesky warrant requirement that might have been difficult. Again, you would hope people would use those things honorably, but a lot of these countries will have laws. I think the UK and such actually, believe it or not, provide more protection for their own citizens from surveillance. They have to go through more hoops in order to do it, but very, very few. And in the US, the requirements for our intelligence services to conduct surveillance of someone who is not a US citizen within the US, if there's a nexus with a foreign intelligence need, is pretty easy. And then this information sharing arrangement can allow for more surveillance than you would think would be possible that your government could do directly to you, which is why another reason why it is good thing to have these additional protections. If it is not available for them to get on the cloud, then they at least have to come to your house and seize your phone, and it gives you notice that something's going on and an opportunity to challenge it in court. If they just go with a secret order to the cloud provider, you will never know about it, and then you will not have a chance to challenge.
One additional thing that's maybe different from the iMessage and the advanced data protection kind of order is that, as Kurt mentioned, like the advanced data protection is a backup for one particular person, and it's only for UK citizens, and for iMessage or any messaging protocol, it's you are not only dealing with the data of the person that you are requesting, but also their interlocutor, right? Like they're the conversation partner. And so for WhatsApp, for instance, if you were to demand a backdoor or access to the data, the messages of one person, then that will necessarily implicate others. And so you may file, in the case of advanced data protection, you won't fall afoul of US law. But in the case of WhatsApp, you may fall afoul of US law because of the way that data regulation and for instance the Consumer Protection Act and you have regulatory bodies in the US that say that you cannot, for instance, do false advertising. And for WhatsApp, they're saying we offer end-to-end encryption. It will be available to anyone but you and your conversation partner. And if that's not true, then the requirement by the UK to do that, any hypothetical requirement by the UK to do that for WhatsApp may fall afoul of US law. So that might be an extra complication there.
I'm wondering, so your hand up, maybe it's time to go to the question. If anyone, we have the mic there in the center, so please come up there for your questions. And hopefully that might, it sounds like it's, you get it exactly right.
Hey, a couple of questions. How's Google faring in this cloud backup?
Well, they've been doing encrypted cloud backups since 2018, and for some reason they have, if the UK has served them such a notice, it is not leaked.
Okay, that's not leaked. All right. In terms of the scanning for the child stuff, wasn't Apple originally doing that on the device locally for going to cloud?
That was a plan at one point, and I think WhatsApp also talked about doing that at some point. To some extent, you have to, if the UK wants such a scan to be absolute, they would have to trust that every iPhone is doing its job correctly. I don't know where that went. Does anybody?
Could that be an argument to still allow on iCloud backup encryption?
So I don't think that was implemented. That's the category scanning.
I mean, my understanding was that they didn't have the technology to actually do that. At the time.
So they claimed it, but
So they basically UK was like, hey, you guys should do this. And WhatsApp well, no, we don't want to. And also, by the way, we can't.
Yeah, but I think you might be referring to there was a time when Apple was considering to do some scanning for particular and they were discussing how it might work, and it had was going to look for particular hashes of CSAM materials, and it had a bunch of other features to it, many of which were criticized, and it turned out at least that their system for searching this thing, people found a few flaws in it, where you could have false positives, false negatives. So it ultimately didn't come together, or at least wasn't ready. And there were some of the features where it would be automatically sending information to the parents of a child if certain triggers were met, which they thought was a great idea in case those children were getting in trouble. But they did not think about the use case in which those children would get in trouble from their parents for having done so in a way that would be very dangerous to their situation. And after talking with other child advocacy organizations beyond the CSAM focused ones, they also revised that system. So anyway, that ultimately didn't happen. But the general gist of this idea, client-side scanning, remains with us. So some of it is a kind of a rhetorical trick that they say, see, we are not breaking end-to-end encryption because we are doing it before you encrypt it, and it goes perfectly encrypted, and then we're also sending the clear text to somebody else, so it has the same effect as if they got it. But see, we haven't broken end-to-end encryption. This has not, this rhetorical trick has not convinced any civil liberties or the technologists who work in the sphere that it's fundamentally different. But there have been some questions of, okay, well, could you do it? I think that client-side scanning also introduces a number of other security flaws. You have to have a lot of trust that what they're scanning. You said okay, we went for CSAM, and that's always the entree point, but it could be they could provide any hash or any type of material, and look for that instead. And so
dissident material.
Yeah. Another challenge with this, not to get too far up on a different topic, but another challenge is that in the terrible world of CSAM, a lot of it is newly produced and therefore does not have a
existing hash.
So it will not sort of solve for that problem. And unfortunately, that is actually the worst end of it, because it's happening now, and there's an actual child who's being abused, and that is a difficult thing to just scan.
Yeah. So from a British perspective, it's actually even worse. I worked in CSAM detection briefly at Google, and one of the things that came up was different laws for different countries. And in Britain, it does not have to be any kind of actual original photograph. It can be fictional art, which means that today's automatic image generators, as far as Britain is concerned, are an absolute fountain of illegal material that does not yet have a hash. So detecting, as far as Britain is concerned, even a tiny fraction of those is not going to happen today with a hash-based scanning system.
Yeah, I have one more question for the border. Is it different, if you have a biometric for face or fingerprint, than knowing something in your head? Can they force
No,
give you
so
your-
if you have a thumbprint or facial scanning biometric like access on your phone,
Yeah.
they can force you to.
They can
open
force
it
you,
up.
yeah, legally.
Okay, I mean technically you could say no, I'm not going to,
Uh-huh.
but now you have obstructed them, and they'll do something. So I don't know, from the technical people on, something that I've been reading about it is that what could be helpful is as you're going through border patrol, you reset your phone or turn it off.
Mhm.
And then you don't actually turn it back on. So basically, this deletes your cache. They're not going to be able to read any notifications or anything like that. And usually, most phones require like a numeric or word type of PIN. Do that and then make your PIN like 20 letters long, right?
'Cause they can't
like
force
have
you
a
to-
passphrase and
Yeah.
be like, all right. I mean, it because, and again, I'm not a technical person. I just watch a lot of Instagram reels. But they, the security researcher said that essentially when you restart or turn it off, it mandates, an actual PIN, which they can't do. But then also it resets things so they can't read certain types of app data and whatnot.
So the levels of protection for different models of phone and different phone operating systems vary. And in the parlance of forensic extraction, there are two abbreviations: BFU, which is before first unlock, and AFU, which is after first unlock. And there are certain models of phones which are supported to quickly unlock even before first unlock. Which means the first time that you, after reboot, enter your long passphrase. But there is this middle ground of some devices which are old but not that old, or some devices which have a older operating system but not that old of an operating system, that have that these forensic extraction devices have partial support for. So like after first unlock or before first unlock, or sorry, yeah, after first unlock, they can easily unlock the phone again. And then the latest operating systems, for instance, they wouldn't have any support for. Generally, this is the information from this comes from leaks of basically support documentation in Celebrite and Grey Key that have been reported widely by 404 Media, among others, and kind of just lets you know, okay, this document was published at this point in time, and only these list of devices are supported. But if you have a device that's in the last few months had an operating system update, then it's not supported, or if you have a new phone at all. So that's kind of what we get a snapshot into that market, into that exploits kind of world, or forensic extraction devices. And generally, always advisable to have a longer passphrase so that it's less crackable. And that because we see these what's called secure enclave bypasses. So basically the coprocessor in iOS devices is the secure enclave. And as mentioned earlier by Isaac, there's a certain amount of key material that is, on the phone itself, and your passphrase is entangled, it's called, with that key material. And the kind of unlock mechanism is done by the secure enclave in iOS devices, and on Android devices by something called a trusted execution environment, which is a coprocessor as well. And so, yeah, just the computational difficulty for unlocking a longer passphrase is, makes it more difficult, even if they have a secure enclave bypass, for instance. So yeah, it's advisable always to kind of complicate your password, and like I recommend, something like 8 to 14 random alpha characters, and that
Few
would
words. It's always going to be better with words.
Well, you get that habit, and I can type in my passphrase pretty quickly.
It's just easier to memorize.
Thank you.
Yeah, correct horse battery staple, the
Yeah.
KCD, if you haven't seen
It's all my passwords.
Fantastic. Yeah. I think it's important to realize that the cloud doesn't exist. The cloud is just other people's computers.
In this case, Apple's.
In this case, Apple. So is Apple maybe missing a trick and overlooking an opportunity to provide a personal backup with a home service, some kind of home device, instead of forcing everyone to go to their servers? Then give them an option of set up a service on your laptop and then do something like that. Would that get around some of these restrictions? How would that play into this if they decided to do something like that?
I guess one thing I should add on this, so I work at the Filecoin Foundation. Filecoin is a distributed storage, network storage, where you can store things on various other people's computers, and one defense to having your material, like going to the one-stop shop with Apple. If you have it in a more distributed system, it doesn't sort of prevent those things from happening, but it makes it more difficult if your stuff is distributed widely. But you still need to encrypt it onto the thing. And so if there was an order to Apple, even if you were using another distributed peer-to-peer storage to back your things up, if they change the code on Apple to send a version in the clear also to the law enforcement server, it would defeat that. So you still would have the technical capabilities order the problem if you're there, but you would avoid, by using a more distributed thing, you would avoid the one-stop shop of centralization. And I think this is a concern not just for the Apple data protection, but a concern for like the number of people whose stuff is on Amazon Web Services is shockingly high, and Google Cloud, Dropbox. There are some competitors, but there are not that many that are being widely used, and they all can be subpoenaed or served a warrant.
So you're talking about not just Apple's, but third-party backup software solution.
Yeah.
So I think you're probably thinking of something like Nextcloud. If you have like a Nextcloud instance, you can sync your contacts via card DAV with your own personal computer, and you can sync your calendar with CalDAV. And because you can, because of a service that we introduced called Let's Encrypt at EFF, you can do so with a HTTPS endpoint when you're actually sending it to your personal computer that's stored in your home and protected by, for instance, full disk encryption. And then you have access to that, and it is at least obvious if they come and try to get all the contacts from it. And yeah, I think that's, as mentioned, it's a pretty good protection to have that. You always need to keep in mind that you are just one person that is tasked with maintaining that server, though, at your own house. And if security vulnerabilities come up, then you need to make sure that you are applying updates to that personal syncing server, for instance, and doing due diligence to protect that data.
Thank you.
But one of the reasons why, just in general, encrypting all of your backups where you hold the key is good, because, as you say, it is someone else's computer, and whether it's someone you trust or not, you want to be able to have it so with you having the key that you reduce the amount that you have to trust other people by holding the key. But then the key is on your phone, so you still have to have control of it.
So one question I have is, most of these debates seem to involve the Western democracies, where we at least have some debate. To what extent should we be concerned that an Apple or a Google is knuckling under to a Russia or a Saudi Arabia or
China?
Well, at least they don't do
Apple
business.
has a different phone system in China. And they have done things differently at the Chinese government request.
Yeah, and so I guess we know that China is a big enough market that they're willing to do different things for China, but for a middle tier power, a Saudi Arabia, an Indonesia, a Russia, where they want to do business, how concerned are we that those unfree countries are forcing, because I'm assuming those governments would like to scan for dissident material and terrorist material just as much as the Western democracies have a legitimate right to, we do want our government to keep us safe from terrorists. We just want them to do it in a particular way.
So large corporations are able to exert more pressure on small governments just by virtue of saying, we won't do business in your country if. And you can consider that a good or a bad thing. I know the Swiss consider it a bad thing. But it does mean that, the straight up threat of, well, we're not going to Indonesia if we can't use basically the same stuff we use in America, sometimes holds. Another plug for the Kalia panel. That did not work out great for Greece.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little concerned just because I see it as a slippery slope. And like going back to some earlier comments, the constitutional framework of our country is quite legitimately under attack. So them having essentially a trial run in other less democratic countries in which to say, oh, does this work? Are we able to leverage this technology in a certain way? Is very scary to me.
Yep.
If we can, not to be overly political, but if we can adopt people off the streets without due process, what's going to stop the government from leveraging a backdoor into your cell phone?
Yeah, and a couple other things to add, and we're running low on time, so I'll be quick about it. But one is that for some of these less free countries that while they may not have the leverage to say change your product, they do have the few $1 million necessary to buy a bug, or actually probably hire a service like the NSO group, which is an Israeli mercenary. And so like Saudi Arabia has, yes, it's tough to burn a multi-million-dollar O-Day, but Saudi's got more than a few multi-millions to go around. And so we have seen things where through NSO group and others that unfree countries have just hired a mercenary. And of course they are saying we are looking for people who are violating our laws, but like under their laws, a dissident and a terrorist. So
Right.
The law maybe reads the same, but it means something different. And look, we have time, I guess, for one more question. We'll get to that while we.
Well, just relevant to that guy, if you want to see some good first person information that came from someone who was in place to know, the book Careless People, woman who got fired from Apple, tells you all about the weird sort of yoga positions Facebook is willing to perform to make China happy because it's that much money as far as they're concerned. Other than that, UK, one nation under CCTV, hail Hydra. And as far as the court goes, it's a spelling error. Somehow they changed precedential law into residential law. They'll fix it eventually.
All right, well, that gives us to our conclusion. So thank you all for coming. Be sure to rate the this panel. If you want to see more panels like this, give it a good rating
Donate.
and donate. And thank you all, my fellow panelists.